Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're going to talk about what we're doing today, and that's we're moving into finalizing our design compositions. So we're creating shape-based, linear, or both types of designs based on grids. So things to consider as you're kind of going into the final stages here. You've made your shape-based designs are made from closed paths. At the end of class yesterday, one of you were having a problem with things not working, and it was because it wasn't a closed path. So make sure that you've created a rectangle around or a square around your whole artboard and included that to create those closed paths on the edges. So when you have things that are bleeding off the edge, they actually have an edge with that rectangle that you've drawn all the way around your shape. Make sure you have color gradients or pattern fill applied to all or some of the shapes. So then you want to also make a choice if you're going to have no stroke at all or a consistent stroke that's the same weight and color applied to all your shapes. So you want to make those decisions, and each one of your designs can do something differently. So think about that. You can also do a design that isn't using fills. It's just focusing on the lines of your design. So you can have open paths, you can have different strokes, different colors, weights, or width profile. So you can have a design that's mostly line-based. That's totally fine as well. If you're you can have things that have open paths, have different stroke styles, can be used with oddly shaped linear elements with a consistent width. And here's another example with blends in a polar grid that has these kind of endpoints. Here's an example of, on the left, of the original design with the flat shapes, flatly colored, and then on the right, the gradations added to those flat shapes. And that's a layer that's put on top of adding a gradation. Thinking again about making symmetrical designs or asymmetrical designs, depending on how you color it. So you could have a very symmetrical design, but the way you color it, this is the same grid, but they're treated two very different ways. So again, you can do variations on one grid and have them designed differently through the way the shapes you pull out and the way you address that. Your design can be a full format where it bleeds off the edges, or it can be sitting inside, completely contained inside your square. That's an option as well. Repetition. So at least I'd like to all of you to have at least one that can be a repeating tile, so you can kind of look at how does that work if I have a repeating tile. Repeating tile. And then using different colors, shapes, or scale of the elements to create dynamic, illustrations, depending on how you color it, creating motion, creating movement. And also seeing on a lot of these, you can also keep the grid visible. You don't have to necessarily delete the grid. So if you have a grid that you want to keep visible, you can keep it all visible or just parts of it. Using color to emphasize that motion, perhaps, or stacking. Patterns that are even, patterns with focal points. So here's examples of just about everything we've looked at is this idea of bringing in lines, gradations, masking, patterns, outline, fill, and really just, creating, being experimental. Notice that in the final designs, we really want to be looking at incorporating some of the patterning we talked about yesterday. Explore adding repeating lines using the blend tool, but again, recognizing that we don't want to get too overly complicated. I want you to notice that none of these are overly complicated, and honestly, with geometric design, less can definitely be more. And you can create movement and action just by the way you're coloring, some or all or partial. you can take the shapes and treat them the pattern differently depending on the way you're coloring it. So there's a lot to look at that way. So again, these are just a shape builder. You know, how do you get to these tools? But you already know that. I don't know why I have these at the end of this. That doesn't make sense. But just those slides. But basically, I want you to think about going into completion. The next thing we're going to do, and I'm going to share I don't know why I stopped sharing my screen. I meant to keep sharing, is I'm going to open up our Blackboard and that our assignment, and I'm going to remind you of like what our final designs can look like. Because I have I'll get that over here. Okay. Here. So here's from last semester. I have these up on Blackboard, so you can always refer to them. The examples of posters from last year's. And what we're going to be doing is choosing 9 or more geometric designs that we're going to put together. Now, these were all from their final set. Now, when the students had these, they were all in different color palettes like we're doing. And then at the end, once they've selected all of their 9 to 10 patterns, tiles that they're going to use, then they used Recolor to put them all in the same color palette to bring them together for the final poster. So we're going to be creating a final poster, 11 by 17, that incorporates all of our tiles, and then we're including one word just to kind of bring in, again, a little bit more challenge is to how do we incorporate at least one word? It can be any word you want. Here is blah. But you can also include those tiles in different ways. So here you can see this student had a repeating pattern that they incorporated, multiple tiles so they can show the repeat in addition to single tiles, and then also playing with the word. So these are a few versions to show those different ways to approach this. Let's see. You're using, the final tiles are going to be 9 or more right here. Examples, you're going to do, your layout will be 9 or more geometric designs. Yep. So, and I chose 9 because of the grid. It can 3, 6, 9 makes a perfect square. You can do a perfect square, or you can add more. So you can see this one has more than 9. I think this one does too. 4. And sometimes you're going to want to show a repeating tile multiple times, depending on how you're doing it. So, and notice all of these are using scale in their layout and design as well, how they're scaling their tiles. So for example, here's one that's twice the size of these 4 smaller ones they have put next to it. So you're going to be using a grid for your poster. Don't forget you're gridding your poster, and then you're tucking your tiles into that poster. So you want to be using scale to kind of make them work the way you want. So here's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this person has 10 tiles they're using. Okay. So those are things to consider, and that's where we're moving next, is to choosing our final 10 and then thinking about how we're going to arrange them in a poster. And then once we have that, we're going to look at Recolor to pull them all into the same color palette for that final presentation. Okay, and I'm going to stop our video here, and then we can talk more.